Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this WNYC and Apollo Theater production of Apollo Uptown Hall, MLK, Activism, and the Arts. I'm Terrence McKnight, classical music host on WNYC's sister station WQXR, and your master of ceremonies for today's program. We open with internationally renowned civil rights leader, founder, and president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton.
As a civil rights advocate, I'm glad to be standing here as part of a program that's co-produced by the world-famous Apollo Theater. And I want you to know, I'm not confused about how I got here. I'm not here because I have a TV show on MSNBC. That's not what paved my way here. I'm here because other advocates paved the way for me. I benefited from their fights for justice and from their investments in me. One of those was the Honorable Percy Sutton. Decades ago, when the Apollo was closed and in danger of being torn down, Mr. Sutton and his friends bought and restored it. Mr. Sutton had been a civil rights attorney. He'd been Malcolm X's lawyer. And as a civil rights lawyer and a radio station owner, he restored the Apollo because he understood how the right kinds of entertainment could reverberate and help uplift and embolden us. He made the connection between activism and the arts, just like this event, MLK Arts and Activism is doing. I'm glad to be a part of a program honoring one of my heroes, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I got to meet Dr. King twice as a kid, but I connected with him throughout my life. Operation Breadbasket was founded by Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1962. And Reverend Jesse Jackson, one of Dr. King's lieutenants and one of my mentors, appointed me as the youth director of the New York City division of Operation Breadbasket when I was 13 years old in 1969. Decades later, I co-founded the National Action Network, or NAN, as we call it, and the Reverend Dr. Y.T. Walker, who once served as Dr. King's chief of staff, was NAN's first chairman of the board. We modeled NAN in the nonviolent and church-based tradition of Dr. King and the SCLC. Men like Y.T. Walker, Jesse Jackson, Percy Sutton, Bill Jones, James Brown, they didn't invest in me because I was an author or because I had a TV show. They didn't owe me nothing. They weren't seeking a return on their investment. I was a kid on welfare, being raised by a single mother in the projects in Brownsville. I couldn't give those men anything but respect and gratitude. They didn't invest in me because I was on the stage at the Apollo. I've been on stage at the Apollo because they invested in me. I have a new book out now. It's called Righteous Troublemakers, and its focus is on the people whose names you probably don't know, even though they made invaluable contributions in the struggle for justice. But this program, MLK Arts and Activism, is almost the opposite of my Righteous Troublemakers book. The program focuses on household names, people who had money and reputations to lose, but who were willing to risk losing money and fame because there was something in them that needed to stand against injustice. One of those people was another one of my mentors, a father figure to me, the godfather of soul, James Brown. Mr. Brown made money at the Apollo performing songs like Cold Sweater, Please, Please, Please. And he will always be remembered for using his fame to hope and help our consciousness come open with songs like Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Michael Jackson was discovered on the Apollo stage. And much of the world will remember Michael for his Thriller and Bad albums. But I remember Michael engaging me and others to do Black advocacy work. We traveled with him during the Victory Tour at the height of his career. I remember his songs, like they don't really care about us and heal the world. That's what I remember. So I ask artists today, what do you want to be remembered for? I preached both Michael Jackson and James Brown's funerals, and I didn't have a hard time coming up with things to say because they did things. We all are going to have a funeral. What do you want somebody to be able to say about you? I wish more artists understood that careers are fleeting. Nobody's on top of the charts forever. 20 years from now, when your six-packs beer, your six-packs belly, it turns to a beer belly, and when nobody wants to see you twerk, then what? I'm not saying don't look good. I'm not even saying don't be sexy. And I'm a reverend. James Brown saying hot pants and get up, I feel like being a sex machine. But he also sang soul power. And I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door, I can get it myself. Wasn't nobody sexier than Marvin Gaye. Let's get it on. You sure love the ball. Sexual healing. But he also did What's Going On. Marvin sang about police brutality and fought his own record label to do it. Think about that. If we did that over 50 years ago in 1971 without TikTok and social media, then you can do it in 2022. Don't get me wrong. There's always a risk in advocacy. It's always easier to do what's popular, and it's usually more lucrative. But when you stand for right things, your community won't forget you. They'll forget what number your song ranked on the Billboard chart, but they won't forget what you did. Martin Luther King attacked and vilified by the media in his final years. But when he was killed, tens of thousands of people stood on his funeral route. Michael Jackson and James Brown died years after either one of them had had a big hit record. But their deaths made front page news around the world and in Harlem. People didn't just say, oh yeah, those guys used to sing such and such song back in the day. No, when those men died, people stood online outside the Apollo for hours, in the freezing cold for Mr. Brown, and in the pouring rain for Michael Jackson, lying going around the corner for blocks, not to see them in concert, but for the chance to say thank you. Yes, that was partly because we loved their music, but it was mostly because we knew they loved us. They took chances for us. They went against the grain for us. They went up against the powers that be because they knew there's a higher power that eventually we're all going to have to answer to. If you want to be average, just do what most folks do, conform. But this is a holiday for a man the whole world remembers because he wouldn't conform. We don't celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. because he was mainstream. We celebrate him because he changed the tide. And in doing so, he helped pave the way for me and for all of us.
The president and CEO of the world-famous Apollo Theater, Janelle Procope.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, not just for your words, but really for your support, your decades-long support of the Apollo, the Harlem community, and me. Greatly appreciated. You know, Reverend Sharpton spoke about the commitment to the community and doing the right thing. And when you do the right thing, you have the support of your community. And since our inception in 1934, the Apollo was one of the first theaters in the nation to be non-segregated. Non-segregated, not only on the stage, but in the audience. And since then, we continue to be a place of opportunity, a place that provides a platform for artists and activists from around the world. And it's synonymous with names like Harry Belafonte, Odetta, Nina Simone, John Lennon, and countless others. They all felt comfortable being at the Apollo and being on our stage. And we continue to welcome artists and activists. You know, in 1965, Reverend King sent a telegram to the leadership of the Apollo thanking them for their work in support of the civil rights movement. We continue to do that. We continue our support and always will stay aligned with our work and the work of others in support of social justice. That's why we are proud for the 9th year to partner with WNYC and their team in celebration of Dr. King. I want to thank especially Brenda Williams-Butts, who is the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at WNYC, and the entire WNYC team. They're wonderful. I also want to thank the March on Washington Film Festival. Through their work and that entire team, they've helped to enhance this program. I also want to thank the community, you, our audience, for supporting the Apollo and for your continued support. And I hope that you will support us as we continue to present programs like this one. And I want to say Happy New Year. Continue to be safe and be healthy and enjoy the show.
From New York Public Radio's Race and Justice Unit, Jami, Floyd.
At the end of 2021, we lost the trailblazing feminist social critic, poet, and author, as well as activist, Bell Hooks. She referenced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout her public and her private life. In 2002, Bell Hooks said of Dr. King, quote, "In strength to love, he speaks about standing in the shadows of fascism and the importance of protecting free speech relative to our democracy." It is at that intersection of creativity and dissidence that we find Dr. King, artists and athletes. Black bodies jumping from slave ships into the Atlantic Ocean, the enslaved in revolt, actions of the abolitionists, individual and collective opposition to Jim Crow and Black codes, organized civil disobedience, defiance amidst the threat of death, nonviolent protests, Black power. Evidence of creative maladjustment, the natural organic opposition to injustice, as Dr. King described it. Creative maladjustment is expressed through the speech of Frederick Douglass and lyrics of Billie Holiday, through the pen of Toni Morrison and the poetry of Langston Hughes. It's expressed through the publications of Ta-Nehisi Coates and Nicole Hannah-Jones. Creative maladjustment is expressed through the lens of Gordon Parks and Spike Lee, photographers of the civil rights movements, and Darnella Frazier, who recorded the video that proved that George Floyd was murdered. Through the musical careers of Prince and the bombast of the conscious hip hop artists, through the paintings of Jacob Lawrence, sculpture of Elizabeth Catlett, and the printmaking of Wadsworth Durrell and Afrocobra Collective. Creative maladjustment takes form in art, as it does in athletics. Curt Flood's fight for free agency, the raised fists of Smith and Carlos, Ali's jab, and his Vietnam protest, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf's national anthem stance, and Billie Jean King's demand for recognition and for better pay. Colin Kaepernick's protest of police brutality, taking a knee against racial inequality in these United States. In September of 1967, roughly 55 years ago, Dr. King insisted that, quote, "There are some things in our society, some things in our world to which we should never be adjusted." Our 2022 celebration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is centered on the call for creative maladjustment. We begin with a reflection on Dr. King and the arts with host and managing editor of The Takeaway, Melissa Harris Perry. She's joined by the Honorable Andrew Young. Young served as mayor of Atlanta, a member of Congress from Georgia, and U.S. ambassador to the United States. But long before these official political roles and titles, Andrew Young was executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and a close confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Ambassador, I want to begin with the most personal, and then we can sort of expand out.
Help yourself.
But when you think about your experience with Dr. King, maybe less the notion of Dr. King as the movement activist leader, but more as the person. I've heard you at times talk about him joking and clowning and the ways that he engaged the people that he worked with. Can you reflect on Dr. King a bit for us?
The Royal Peacock on Auburn Avenue was where most of the blues and rock and roll and the old music, what they used to call the Chitlin Circuit. And so he'd have to pass there. And so he got along with everybody, and everybody knew who he was. And so it was easy for him. He could drop in any Black community in America and carry on a conversation and be comfortable with all the folk that were hanging out, because he hung out on the streets. Now, everybody knew he was the preacher's son. And they treated him that way with great respect. And it was as though even growing up, he was somebody special. Because his father was not only the pastor of one of the largest churches, but his grandfather had been the pastor of the same church. So he had a generational priority on Auburn Avenue. Auburn Avenue was also, in his time, where all of the soldiers that were in the South from all over the country. We had Fort Benning, 80 miles to the south, Fort Gillem, Fort McPherson. There were about 6 Army bases within 2 hours of Atlanta. And so on the weekends, Auburn Avenue until early Sunday morning belonged to the nightclubs and the soldiers. And then it was almost as when the sun came up, then that was God's territory and the churches took over. So he lived a full life of with all kinds of wonderful people. And he loved them. He respected them. They knew who he was. And so anywhere we went in the country, when you'd get on the main Black street in the community, he was at home.
I love hearing these reflections. There are obviously so many images of Dr. King, but I will say my favorite photograph of him is of him in Chicago during the Chicago campaign, playing pool on the South Side. And there is something about seeing him in that relaxed atmosphere, seeing his humanity, his manhood, as you've described it, that all-American Black boyhood, now manhood, even in the context of all the serious work he was doing.
Yeah. Well, it was the seriousness of the work that came from the people on the streets that he grew up with. Like he used to quote this guy that used to hang outside the barbershop and play a guitar. And he had this song, "Been Down So Long That Down Don't Bother Me." And he'd sing it that way sometimes. And then other times he would sing it, "Been down so long, getting up don't cross my mind." And he quoted from these blues singers off the street in his sermons, and he he felt what they were talking about, and he knew that it was his challenge to get them to rise up. And we did.
What you've just done, I think, is so critical by linking that blues aesthetic in the context of the movement. It's not just that the arts fueled the movement, but the movement was itself a kind of art, right? That it was a lyric, it was a composition, it was bringing together these parts and understanding that you had, maybe upper middle class students, and you had, a 78-year-old fearless leader, right? Together in those moments.
Because the movement, well, the only place we could meet was in the church. And before, usually the meeting started at 8:00. Well, that meant that the preachers got there at 8:00. The old folk came straight from work, or 5 or 6 o'clock, and they started moaning and singing these old long meter hymns and spirituals. And they sort of carried on. They got the church warmed up. Then around 6:30 or 7, the high school students came in and they started singing freedom songs and clapping their hands. And you had an integration of the generations every night in a church in Birmingham, Alabama, or in Selma, Alabama.
Ambassador, as we complete our interview, and thank you for your generosity with your time today, I'm wondering if you can just give us a word. I know many people in this moment, with the COVID pandemic, with the continuing divisions in our country, are feeling hopeless. What would be the lesson from the movement and from Dr. King that you might offer us about how to stay resilient and hopeful, even as we resist the worst impulses of our nation?
Well, I think that where we found our strength was in the heritage of our ancestors. That Martin, whenever, I mean, it could be anywhere in a message, he'd say things like black men and women in slavery had more faith than people in the Old Testament. They straightened out Jeremiah's question mark into an exclamation point, because they didn't ask, is there a balm in Gilead? They said, there is a balm in Gilead that heals a sin-sick soul. There's a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. So when I get discouraged and think my work's in vain, then comes the Holy Spirit that revives my soul again, because there is a balm in Gilead. And he could start preaching like that, sitting around in a hotel room. And the distance between his spiritual life and the movement was non-existent. The movement came out of his spiritual life. There was something in him that synthesized, like an orchestra conductor, the culture of the Black church, Black folk in the pool halls, people in the farms, and he did it with a rhythm that made you have to pat your feet and make you want to jump up and shout. And it was that affirmation of faith that got us through, as we say, many dangers, toils, and snares. I have already come. It was grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home.
Joining Melissa Harris Perry is artist, collector, CEO, and founder of Black Art in America, Najee Dorsey.
Art is our visual language. Art chronicles and documents our history. It documents our journey. It also plays an active role in mobilizing people, touching them in a spiritual, a visceral way to get them to take action. it's how we see the world. I mean, hopefully, enough people live with art and been exposed to art, and art has tremendous impact on individuals and also our culture. I mean, it's one of the first things when you take a look at it from a historical standpoint that people try to, fight and get rid of the artist, because the artist mix and mingle with all aspects of society. And so artists are considered to be some of the most dangerous in terms of free thinkers and progressives in any community.
Part of what I also want to do here is not presume that the movement for racial justice always looks like precisely these kind of high profile movements. So I want to go to Memphis, and I want to go to the work of environmental racism and the work that you've done there.
Well, a few years ago, and this is like 20 some years ago, but a few years ago, I created this body of work about Poor People's Campaign, basically a jumping off point where I use children as a way to reflect in terms of how we live in plain sight of a lot of social injustice and environmental racism in our communities. Now, last year, I was watching a documentary from Vice that chronicled the Boxwood community in South Memphis fight against the Lehrer pipeline. They was looking to run a pipeline through the waterways that was going to impact the Black community and also subsequently take a lot of Black owners' land. And so I ended up taking out a billboard directly across the street from the Lehrer to lend my voice in this particular struggle, the struggle for solidarity with the protesters that was there on the ground in Memphis fighting this fight. Now, within a matter of days, the story got picked up by Forbes magazine. It also got picked up by MLK 50, who's continuing to keep the legacy alive of Dr. King, and also one of the local papers. And shortly within a couple of days, the company announced that they were no longer going to move forward with this proposed pipeline that they had been fighting for all this time. So I think that's a small role, that's a small active thing that I was able to take part of, that I'm really proud of, because it was timely, it was needed, and it was enough of us small guys basically just fighting a good fight against a major corporation, and it's one of the few instances where I think that we actually won that battle.
And I want to be clear for folks, and we'll make sure that folks can see some aspect of this. But when you say I took out a billboard, I feel like there are those who will think, it's a billboard of words that says, don't build the pipeline. But of course, it's art. So describe the piece of it.
Yeah. So the piece that I used was Ice Cream Melting, which was a young woman holding a SpongeBob SquarePants ice cream sickle. But in the background, there's an oil refinery. So it was in juxtaposition. The artwork was in juxtaposition to the actual oil refinery that's in Memphis, right off the interstate, across the street from this particular neighborhood. And the billboard was 14 feet by 48 feet. So it was a very large presence for the hundreds of thousands of people that drove in Memphis on the interstate. Now, granted, this is literally less than 5 miles away from the Lorraine Hotel. It's in the tradition of what Dr. King was doing way back in the day when he went to go do the march for the sanitation workers during that time. So, we're following in that tradition.
You drew our attention here to Memphis. And obviously, Memphis is where Dr. King is assassinated. It's also, when I think about the photography that came out of the Memphis sanitation workers' strikes, those placards, I am a man.
Oh, yeah.
Those are not art in the high art sense, and yet they also become part of the visual representation of our history, of our movement, and as you said, of the stories that have to be told. So do a little something for me here, and take your time, it's fine. Help me think about what counts as art, and maybe particularly what counts as Black art. Okay,
so that's a very iconic image. I think it's about Bill Withers. When I think of that statement, I am a man, I actually got a piece of art in my collection that speaks to that by George Hunt, who was from Memphis. These are the things that, that speaks to us. Like, I think art can be so many different things. It's not necessarily only a painting, but it's a way of thinking, and it's a way of seeing the world. Maybe it's something that empowers us. And I think that's become a cultural icon. I am a man. It's a bold and beautiful statement. What is art? Art for me is everything from the paintings, the music, to the food, to the time that we spend with each other. I think to even giving thought and being purposeful in our social media engagement. For me, I live an art-filled life. The art, the work that's on the wall. So it could be a quilt, it could be a poem. No, it's so many different things.
It's a real pleasure to be joined by the Apollo Theater's Senior Director of Programming, Leatrice Elsie.
Thank you, Terrence. It is so good to see you, brother. It's been way too long. I'm so pleased to be here to represent the programming teams at the Apollo, WNYC, and the March on Washington Film Festival, because we believe in the importance and the power of art. And Terrence, you're an artist. I've heard you perform, so I know that you agree and co-sign to this.
Oh, absolutely. I've been a performer most of my life. And since 2009, I've been a host here at WQXR, New York's classical music station, sister station to WNYC. And right now I'm writing a book. It's called Concert Black. And it's about the accomplishments of Black artists in the industry with such a long history of segregation. And so when you consider creators like Duke Ellington and Mary Lou Williams, you realize that the lack of diversity in classical music isn't about the lack of Black talent. It's more about the fear of real integration. But music is a universal language. It wants to bring people together. That's why we love it so much.
That is why we love it so much. That is so true. And Terrence, since 1934, the Apollo has hosted a deep array of genres and expressions. And that tradition continues this season. One of our upcoming productions is The Gathering, a collective sonic ring shout, where we partner with the American Composers Orchestra and the National Black Theater to present an evening of advocacy, urgency, and healing through an array of artistic lenses. And so it's really fitting to share a sneak peek of The Gathering during this particular event, MLK Arts and Activism. So the piece that we've selected is a protest piece of sorts. It's from Joel Thompson's Horatio, 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. And this piece is really special because it honors unarmed Black men who've been killed by police and others.
Yeah. So you're about to see The Gathering Quartet, directed by Gregory Hopkins, performing the Amadou Diallo suite from The Gathering, a collective sonic ring shout.
I'm going.
New York Public Radio Senior Vice President, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Brenda Williams-Butts.
Thank you, Terrence. It's an honor to be partnering with the Apollo Theater to present WNYC's 16th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration in collaboration with the March on Washington Film Festival. I know we're all eager to continue to hear from today's incredible speakers and performers, so I'll keep my part brief and cut to the chase. 2021 was quite a year. On one hand, we rejoiced in the rollout of the vaccine, which let many of us reconnect with our loved ones and let brilliant artists and creators return, even for a brief time, to the live performance that sustains our collective spirit. On the other, we have watched with dismay as the fabric of our democracy has been worn thinner and thinner through attacks on our nation's capital and the voting rights that are the bedrock of American democracy. And of course, as the year ended, we have been reminded of what we continue to be up against with the arrival of the new variant. As we embark on a new year, it's no exaggeration to say that our nation is at a crossroads. And in the days ahead, we must decide who we want to be as Americans and as citizens of the world community. Every year when this day approaches, I find myself returning to the teachings of Dr. King to find inspiration and grounding. In 1957, he famously said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that." These words struck a chord with me this year, especially as I found myself asking, in the face of what can feel like such insurmountable darkness, how do we find our light? Well, we find it in the arts, which lifts us up and brings us back into our better selves. We find it in the tireless work of the organizers and activists who, if you'll forgive the phrase, light a fire under our butts, reminding us to never give up on the dreams that Dr. King articulated and which we all must continue to carry forward today. We also find it in free and fair press, dedicated to shining light on injustice and corruption, empowered by journalists who know that there are not two sides to every story, especially the racist and nativist stories that proliferate too easily today. I am proud to work at WNYC, an organization that brings so much of this light into the world. Throughout the challenges of the past 2 years, we've stayed strong and stayed true to our mission, giving community leaders a platform to speak and share their work, keeping people connected to culture and arts, even when our stages are dark, and lifting up diverse human stories so we can see inside the lives of others and ultimately see one another as more fully human. I want to thank you all for joining us today and for being a part of our community. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
The host and managing editor of WNYC's The United States of Anxiety, Kai Wright, and president of Color of Change, Rashad Robinson.
We know the huge role some of the Hollywood stars of the past, Black Hollywood, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, played in the civil rights movement. Talk about that a little bit, like what role those people played in the civil rights movement and who's playing that role now.
Yeah, when I think about a Harry Belafonte, Ossie Davis, and Ruby Dee and Sidney Poitier, I oftentimes think about the deep respect they had with building up infrastructure, the role that they had directly with the activists on the ground, the folks who were leading organizations, building up and recognizing their role in the ecosystem of being able to help advance, empower change by supporting folks like Dr. King, supporting SNCC, supporting the organizations that
financial
translating, the presence and the visibility of these moments into the actual power that was needed. And, there are so many, I think, current activists, when we talk about the Change Hollywood effort, that effort would not have gotten off the ground without a deep collaboration with Michael B. Jordan and Outlier Productions, who was our partner as we launched it. I think about so much of the work we've done in Hollywood being in deep partnership with folks like Ava DuVernay. I think about some of the early work in writers' rooms being sort of brought in by folks like Mara Brackett-Keel. I think about sort of the ongoing way that activists like Kerry Washington, activist actors like Kerry Washington and Tracy Ellis Ross and Kendrick Sampson and so many others have been able to not just support us at Color of Change, but so many of the other leading movement organizations and being able to help us reach more people using their narrative infrastructure to help elevate our demands and bring more people in. I think about the work we've done, with folks like Common and others. And all of that, I think, is incredibly important to sort of recognizing the deep role that sort of cultural advocates have in helping people see the world and seeing what needs to be done, and the role that activists have in helping to build the strategies and the advocacy and the efforts to power that type of change.
It's funny because I think the popular conversation, I don't know, for some people, the popular conversation is like, oh, we don't have the kind of activism amongst Black celebrities and Black leaders that we used to have, and that there's this nostalgia for it. But even and I admit, I'm guilty a little of that thinking myself, but even just hearing you tick through those names and thinking about it, it's actually quite a robust moment.
We have to build the infrastructure, build the platforms that allow people to be part of these efforts, and then also give people the pathways to be powerful on these issues. And part of what we've tried to do with Change Hollywood is not just say that the industry has to change, but to actually put forward sort of 5 clear demands, and under those actually hold the industry accountable. And so what we've done is we've pushed studios, and we've pushed agencies, and we've pushed those inside of Hollywood to actually commit to these roadmaps, to this roadmap of change. And this roadmap actually gives folks who say Black Lives Matter a clear pathway to start actually moving towards making that a reality. Because far too often we get a lot of words. And what our goal at Color of Change is to constantly move people from words to action, to move people beyond statements into actually doing something that's real and clear, and then to put the mechanisms in place to evaluate it. Otherwise, it's all talk, and it doesn't actually get us anywhere. And, part of, I think, how the world will look 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now is not just sort of our hopes and dreams, because that wasn't what we should take away from the 60s and the 70s and civil rights movement. What we should take away was the deep level of work and strategy and effort in making those dreams, in making that vision, and making those demands actually possible, in translating what we talk about at Color of Change as presence and visibility into power. And power is the ability to change the rules. And sometimes those are the written rules of policy, and sometimes those are the unwritten rules of culture. But always the work to change the rules gets us to a place where we can look back and see what we've actually accomplished.
Rashad, thanks so much for this time.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll toss it now to my colleague, Jami Floyd.
Thank you so much, Kai. And now I am joined by Garrett McQueen, executive producer and co-host of the Trilloquy podcast and president of Trillworks Media. Garrett works at the intersection of race and classical music. He's an equity consultant, a guest speaker, a curator, and a presenter at the intersection of classical music and race, and serves on the board of the American Composers Forum as the Equity Committee Chair. He maintains leadership advisory positions with the Black Opera Alliance, the Gateway Music Festival, and the Lakes Area Music Festival. We're so pleased to have Garrett McQueen with us today. Garrett, thank you so much for being here. How has classical music intersected with activism? Because that's surprising for a lot of folks.
Yeah, the intersection of Black activism and classical music is a very long history filled with the names of far more people that I could share with you here today, but I'll offer a few examples of what this has looked like over the past couple centuries and how it all remains relevant today. So first and foremost, I have to acknowledge that activism among classical musicians predates Black Lives Matter, it predates the Civil Rights Movement, and even America as a country. Way back around the year of 1729, there was a man born on a slave ship headed from the African continent to England. His name was Ignatius Sancho. Now, Ignatius would grow up to be one of the leading figures in the abolitionist movement over in England, and was even the very first Black person to vote in a British election back in 1774. So in addition to being that sort of activist and even an author, Ignatius Sancho was a composer of a vast number of compositions for string orchestra. Now, these pieces weren't regularly performed performed for many, many, many years, but today there are ensembles all around the world that use his music as a means of remembering the slave trade as a global scourge, not just one that impacted the United States. It's a dark part of our human history that was overcome through the work of all sorts of people, musicians included. Now, if you fast forward about 100 years or so, you can find another Black Briton whose work lived at the intersection of classical music and activism. He was a man named Samuel Coleridge Taylor. He only lived to be 37 years old, but he managed to get a lot done in his relatively short life. First and foremost, Samuel Coleridge Taylor was a broadly respected composer in his own right. He had a number of pieces that really hit big back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. One of those works was called Hiawatha's Wedding Feast. That work was such a big hit that it led him to an American tour so that he could learn more about the diaspora, and that fed into his beliefs when it comes to Black people and Black civil rights. In the year of 1900, he was the youngest participant at the first Pan-African Conference, and then in 1904, he was received by President Roosevelt at the White House, which, as everyone can imagine, was pretty revolutionary in itself for a Black man back in those days. Today, his music continues to be performed and celebrated, and in my opinion, his music serves as one of the greatest artifacts that we have when it comes to exploring the intersectional history of Pan-African thought and Western classical music. Now, of course, it wasn't just the men who were doing the good work over history. In 1913, a woman named Margaret Bonds was born. Her father was an activist and her mother was a musician, so she grew up thinking about those ideas in tandem. Her most famous work is a tune that many folks know called He's Got the Whole World in His Hands, but a work that lots of folks are returning to by Bonds these days is her 1964 Montgomery Variations. This work was written in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. and the tireless work done by Black folks down in Alabama fighting for civil rights and specifically voting rights. She also has a Christmas oratorio called The Ballad of the Brown King, which is also beginning to get more and more play in concert settings. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Margaret Bonds' teacher, the folks she learned music from. As an aside, I was really lucky to get to study with someone Black in the early years of my development, and so was Margaret Bonds. It proved very impactful. As a high school student, Margaret Bonds studied piano and composition with two Black musicians, in fact, a man named William Levy Dawson and a Black woman named Florence Price. So I'd like to share a short excerpt from a holiday show that I produced for Kwanzaa back in 2020 to give everyone a taste of her music. This excerpt features a bit of Florence Price's single movement piano concerto as performed by the Chicago Sinfonietta featuring pianist Karen Walwyn.
Very beautiful, Garrett McQueen. Let me ask you how the continued legacy of racial justice and activism in classical music is being engaged today, if it is.
Yeah, it's very important to understand that the work of fighting for Black rights through Western classical music has never died, thankfully. So, and there are many ensembles, institutions, and even more individuals who are continuing this fight. So I'll name a few here. The first group I have to name is the Gateways Festival Orchestra. The Gateways Music Festival was founded back in 1993 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina by Arminta Hummings Dumasani. The inaugural concert actually included a violin concerto featuring Louis Farrakhan on solo violin, something that a lot of folks don't know. Well, Arminta later took the organization to Rochester, New York in 1995 when she became an associate professor at the Eastman School of Music, and the group has been going strong up in Rochester ever since. In addition to the Gateways Music Festival, I have to mention the incredible work that's been happening in the world of opera, including the Metropolitan Opera's premiere of Fire, Shut Up in My Bones, which marked their very first staging recording of an opera by a Black composer last year. I had the great pleasure of flying to New York and seeing it myself. Now, on the activist side of opera, I'm really proud to be a leadership council member of the Black Opera Alliance, which works to get more Black voices, more Black perspectives, and even more Black compositions on opera stages across the country, just so that things like that isn't a one-off, but something that becomes really normalized in the field. You have other organizations similar to the Black Opera Alliance that have remained active, including the International Society for Black Musicians, whose mission is to cultivate an international community of Black musicians through education, performance, collaboration, and the advancement of their work, and to facilitate the unlearning of centered whiteness in the scholarship of music, specifically classical music. Additionally, institutions like the American Composers Forum and New York's own American Composers Orchestra have shifted in recent years toward racial equity. So it's really exciting, and there's a lot going on.
Let me ask you how people can help to continue the momentum of achieving racial equity in the world of classical music.
Yeah, that's a really big question, but what I see as the greatest means of continuing the momentum is acknowledging the Negro spiritual as America's first classical music. We have to understand that with the exception of musical traditions codified by indigenous people, there's really nothing more musically American than the spiritual. So as the spiritual evolved over the generations, it was separated from the musical traditions codified by folks who were not Black and in turn deemed as something different than classical music. But I believe that we all have to reconsider Black music in all of its iterations since the spiritual as something classical. Not only will this inspire more Black activism from more of our communities, but it'll also transform the genre of so-called classical music, as I like to say, into something that reflects more of who we are as a human race today and in the future.
WNYC host Brian Lehrer and celebrated author Jacqueline Woodson.
I think it's accurate to say we live in a time of activism for social justice, for racial justice, that's probably greater than anything since Martin Luther King's day, since the 1960s. Is it influencing either what you read or what you write in the last couple of years?
It's definitely made me think harder about the stories I want to read. I want to read stuff where people have something to say. I've never been engaged with stories where there's a whole lot of navel gazing anyway, but I am much more intentional about what I read. I feel like my time is shorter too, but in terms of my own writing, I've always been committed to social justice. So that hasn't changed so much. It's always been the challenge of finding the right language, finding the love language that people can hear. And I think now more than ever, there's so much noise, right? There's so much outside noise. And there's also the pushback against that love language and that pushback against social justice. So I do find myself being much more thoughtful and intentional about how I'm telling stories. And again, like I said, what I'm reading.
Jacqueline, one of the things going on these days, as I'm sure you know, might be called a war on writing, with attempts to censor the 1619 Project, what some people call critical race theory, even if they misinterpret entirely and sometimes willfully what it is. I wonder if you are feeling that as a writer, even with either with respect to your own work or just as you look out at the world.
It's such a great question. I mean, first and foremost, I have to give my flowers to Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's holding down the fort on so much of the pushback and hatred she's getting for telling the truth. And I think that I have seen, I'm censored in a lot of places. And one thing I think about is, if I was growing up today, would I have gotten all of the class learning I got about Martin Luther King Jr., right? Because people would say this is something that we don't want taught in our classrooms because it might make our white kids feel bad. And that's what the dialogue is, right? That's what the argument is. So books like The Story of Ruby Bridges are being struck from reading lists. Brown Girl Dreaming has been challenged.
Your book.
Yeah, my book, Brown Girl, a couple of my books, but that one was surprising to me in that it's about American history, and people are pushing back against American history told from the points of view of the non-white bodies that lived it. So it's exhausting. I mean, but the work has always been exhausting. And I think the only thing I can say is we have to keep speaking up. We have to keep reading those books. We have to keep demanding them in our classrooms. We have to get on the school boards, because people on school boards are getting threatened. Their lives are getting threatened for bringing a book like the story of Ruby Bridges into the classroom. It's bananas, but it makes perfect sense, because when this kind of change is happening, people get very fearful. And we see in this that words and books are very powerful. And for me as a writer, I just want the books to get into the hands of the young people who need them, so that they have the tools for understanding the context of the world they're living in now. So it's heartbreaking and it's exhausting, and it's exciting because it's about we know where the struggle is, we know where the fight is, and we know the work that we need to do to make this country better.
Joining WNYC's host of all of it, Allison Stewart, is stage and film actress Trezana Beverly and artistic director of the National Black Theater, Jonathan McCrory.
Trezana, I'm going to start with you. How is theater uniquely positioned to address issues of civil rights?
Because theater is social. Theater is a social window to the world. And everything that theater does is social. And theater also reflects the politics of the era that it lives in, the generation that lives in that era.
I would just uplift that theater is an essential aspect to that gathering catalytic momentum when we actually talk about social justice and we actually talk about social change. And when we think about even in our current frame of the George Floyd moment and when the civic unrest happened, theater was happening in not necessarily buildings, but on the streets. The way in which people were expressing themselves and creating creative ways of letting us know how how that situation was living inside their bodies and creating communal gatherings outdoors. I think that is another way in which we can look at theater that's not so formalized. Sometimes we take the Western gaze of theater as the way in which we should be leaning forward. And I think the indigenous aspect of it, which is sometimes not in that formal space of a theatrical proscenium or in a theatrical home, is equally as important as the latter.
Trezana, I'm going to brag on you for a moment. For people who don't know, that you were the first African-American actress to win Best Actress Tony for Colored Girls in the late 70s. I think I may have seen it because I'm pretty sure my mom and dad and I went to see it 2 or 3 times, grew up in the area.
Yes.
So it is a pleasure and an honor to speak with you.
Thank you.
What did you think when you first read that play?
Well, I loved it. Colored Girls gave a voice to African-American women who found themselves in emotionally abusive relationships. I cannot tell you the women, the Black women who would wait for us at the stage door. Sometimes they would follow us down the street, or you would see a sister sort of hovering back in the shadows, and they would come up and they would say, "Thank you," or "Can I talk to you?" You follow. When we started doing it down at the New Federal Theater with Woody King, we had sisters that were falling out in the aisles. It was like church. It was a very, very transitional play, both in its structure. It broke the fourth wall. It was on Broadway with Equus. Chorus Line came after. Those 3 productions, Equus, Colored Girls, and Chorus Line, broke the fourth wall, which led to narrative theater. The set was very, very simple. And it ushered in narrative theater on Broadway. And as I said, it really strengthened the self-esteem of African American women to speak up and not settle for abusive relationships. As I said, theater holds that mirror up to the universe. And Colored Girls was a very pivotal and transitional theater piece for American theater.
Jonathan, when you think about the playwrights and the creatives of the 60s and the 70s, is there any one that particularly stands out for you, or do you have any that have been really inspirational for you?
I mean, in the current frame, I mean, there have been actually a lot, but the one that pops to the front of my mind at this current moment is Amiri Baraka, and it's actually not necessarily his play, but his writing, A Call for Revolutionary Theater, which for me was an igniting force. It helped me to curate another series that I did in 2020 called Call for Revolutionary Theater 2020, where it brought a bunch of Black theater professionals, practitioners to actually talk about and inspired by Mary Baraka's essay, which really leaned into the promise and to the premise of what does it mean in the midst of, in his time and at the precipice of what would become the Black arts movement, another pandemic. He was in the midst of a pandemic in 1968, the assassination of MLK. All these things that were happening, one could say there was a mirroring effect that was happening in 2020. And so then what does that call, that lean in of that call mean for the current Black artists? How do we ignite some of the beautiful legacy torchbearers? I mean, Trezana brought up Lori Carlos, who is now who has transitioned and was a fierce advocate for ritualistic theater, helped to frame that space for ritualistic theater. So when we start to think about how, as an emerging, and I still consider myself an emerging practitioner inside of this field, when I think about the torches that I have to hold up and light up, and that are part of my pathology and part of my practice, I think of someone like a Mary Brock, I think of someone like a Lori Carlos, and I think of also someone like a Paul Carter Harrison. All legacy bearers, all torch bearers who really help to shape and frame the aesthetics that I get to now play in, and create the foundation for me to be able to do the work that I do today.
Trezana, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I'm thinking of the work that Woody King Jr. has done with the New Federal Theater. Most of the Black actors that you are seeing on screen now pass through the New Federal Theater. Denzel Washington, Felicia Rashad, the list goes on. And the work of the Negro Ensemble, the National Actors Theater, the theater that Sidney Poitier came out of. And those actors were very political in their perspective and mindset. You had Anna Lucasta, which was the first play on Broadway from that theater company, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. They were political activists. They branched out to have a theater that would speak to African-American men and women who wanted to become professional actors, and they went on to become great actors. Political theater / activist theater, I have thought within the framework of Black theater can't be anything other than theater that is created by activists, people who have a sense of the world and how it can change and how we can hold a mirror up to our world.
So Jonathan, we experienced the work, The Gathering, earlier that you co-created. Tell us a little bit about the significance.
We have curated a beautiful evening with 3 existing orchestral pieces paired with three also commissioned works by contemporary artists to do a call and response, which is in the tradition of the ring shout, and allowing that call and response to take us on a journey that hopefully give us a space to feel liberated and free, and also allow for us to have a conversation with our grief, and also allow for us to gather together collectively in a massive way. And I'm really excited to have artists like Toshi Regan, to have artists like Jason Michael Webb, to have artists like Joel Thompson, like Courtney's with her orchestral piece Spectrum. There's just a beautiful array of sound, of technique, and of us going into a little bit of an indigenous pattern to actually take us to step forward. So it'll happen on May 7th. And looking forward to it. Something we've been really excited about working on for the past 2 years.
March on Washington Film Festival Artistic Director, Isa Sarah Bay.
Acknowledging the source of all life and giving honor to the 7 directions, north, south, east, west, above, below, and within, and to the circle of life of African ancestred people, those who've gone on before, those living, and those yet to be born. Because they were, we are. Because we are, they will be. This year's Apollo Theater Uptown Hall remembers those artists and athletes whose lives and careers provided guidance and inspiration to the movement. The March on Washington Film Festival has regularly recognized not just the talent and creativity of many artists, athletes, and activists, but also their courage in breaking barriers, defying racism, and risking their careers, lives, and liberty to elevate the cause of freedom. This year is the March on Washington Film Festival's 10th anniversary. Over the past decade, we have corrected the mistold stories and unearthed the untold stories of the famous icons and unknown foot soldiers of the movement. The festival has grown to an international platform connecting past strategies and tactics to the present day for a global audience. We have celebrated in words and music Fannie Lou Hamer's 1964 run for Congress that challenged and temporarily halted the swearing in of the all-white, all-male Mississippi congressional delegation. We sat with the Honorable Attorney General Eric Holder as he listened to Sarah Collins Rudolph describe the pain she still feels after surviving the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963, which took the lives of her sister and 3 of her friends. She was the 5th little girl in that church basement, and there is still no compensation for victims of civil rights domestic terror in this country. But just last month, we rejoiced with Claudette Colvin when her 1955 juvenile arrest record for refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus was expunged, proving that the arc of the moral universe is indeed long and bends toward justice. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Isabel Wilkerson, John Lewis, Sonia Sanchez, Amanda Gorman, and Nicole Hannah-Jones are among the list of presenters who have attended past festivals to tell our stories. You can too. Visit www.mowff.org for details on the many events we have planned for this, our 10th anniversary year. And now, enjoy the rest of the commemoration and march on.
We welcome the return of Jami Floyd, this time joined by sports curator at Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, Dr. Damion Thomas.
So we want to look at the long arc, the long moral arc of activism in sports, history, art today. And as I understand it through studying your work, the government, the US government actually used sports as they used other forms of art, jazz, for example, as an instrument of quote unquote effective propaganda. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I wrote a book called Globetrotting, African American Athletes in Cold War Politics. And what I do in that book is I look at the central role of U.S. segregation and its negative impact on U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War, the period from the late 1940s through the mid to late 1960s. That's the period that I cover. And by 1949, half of Soviet anti-American propaganda was about US race relations. And they were saying to nations in Asia, in the Middle East, and Africa, why would you want to align with the United States when they treat their people of color so poorly? And so in response to that, the US State Department began to send prosperous African Americans abroad to try to counteract the notion that the American dream wasn't available to African Americans. And so they sent a number of jazz musicians, they sent a number of athletes on these goodwill tours. And what was interesting about it was a number of the athletes did not know that they were going on State Department sponsored tours, because the State Department would often partner with different sports organizations to send these tours abroad. And so the US government hoped that by sending these men and women abroad, they would counteract notions of racial inequality. But what happened in this program is that these programs couldn't compete with the images of the violence from Little Rock, from Montgomery, in other places. So ultimately, the US had to change. And one of the forgotten stories of the civil rights movement was how influential that international pressure because of the Cold War was, which led to reform in the US. Certainly there were people who wanted to do the right thing, but it was also the cost of racial segregation and racial oppression to US foreign policy that helped fuel change in America.
Is there a timeline that we can see as we walk through the history of athletes in this country and their activism?
Sure. Every generation has its own fight and its own way of engaging with racial oppression. If we think back to the era of Jack Johnson, this is also the era when there are a number of lynchings of African Americans as well. And we have to remember that the majority of African Americans who were lynched because they were economically prosperous. They refused to be pushed off of their land. They refused to sell cheaply. And so their towns and their businesses were burned and they were often murdered. For African Americans of that generation, Jack Johnson, who flaunted his wealth and his fame, was a symbol of fearlessness. He was a symbol of somebody who was not going to be cowed and swayed because of the threats that came against him. And so he's a symbol that we are going to stand, we're going to fight, and we are going to be here. And so for the next generation of athletes, you get Joe Louis and Jesse Owens. And that's a generation where they are trying to figure out how to navigate racism through good behavior, through appealing to the hearts and minds of white America. And it's based on this idea, can you achieve success and equality by being deferential, by being a good citizen, by being someone who is not confrontational around the race question in hopes that you would change the hearts and minds of white America? So in some ways, that generation believed it was their burden to change white perceptions of African Americans. And then you get the generation of the civil rights movement, who then rejects that idea and says, no, what we have to do is confront racism. We have to confront the laws. We have to confront these notions of inequality, and we have to stand up to them. Athletes like Tommie Smith and John Carlos, athletes like Jim Brown and Muhammad Ali are confronting the system. Then by the late 60s, the doors of confrontation sort of closed with the white backlash. And then we enter the era of Michael Jordan. And I think this is an important era. Thinking about the post-civil rights generation, their charge is not to protest, but it's rather to achieve. How do we take advantage of all of these opportunities that were created by the civil rights movement? How do we walk in these halls of education and the best colleges that have been opened? How do we walk into corporate America, Xerox and IBM, and achieve? And so that generation is trying to figure out how can we best use the increased opportunities that we gained out of the civil rights movement. And so Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and others really are creating an economic path and an economic kind of empowerment that becomes really important, particularly for this current generation. Many times when we look at LeBron James and the other athletes today, we see a clear line back to Jim Brown, to Muhammad Ali and others. But we also have to see that line from Michael Jordan, because while many of the athletes in the 60s and 70s were persecuted because of their involvement, these athletes today have created a system where they can be politically active and it doesn't cost them economically because they've created these independent streams of income. And so I think both are crucial. The activism from the 1960s and the economic advancement from the 1980s and 90s, we see both of them evident in this current generation. And so that's how I see this evolution of athletes and their social role and function.
But then is Colin Kaepernick at the end of that timeline? Is he a turning point to the next generation? Where do you see him fitting into that timeline?
Certainly, Colin Kaepernick is about this new generation, which gets economic empowerment and also gets politically active and engaged. Colin Kaepernick lost a lot of money because of his inability to gain another NFL contract. But he's also been able to create alternative streams of income. He's also been able to kind of take his activism and not suffer as much as he would have in the past. So Colin is the athlete that really brings this moment to the fore, particularly for football players. And he's really the guy who says, look, we can't stand by and think that our presence and play on the field is disconnected from what's going on in America.
Do you find in your work at the museum that people have a very in-depth understanding of Dr. King and his work, his legacy? Or do you find, if you encounter people talking about Dr. King at all in your work, that it is lacking in this time?
I think, unfortunately in society, we have allowed Dr. King to be deduced to the I Have a Dream speech, which is a very powerful speech where he's reimagining American society. But Dr. King was a political theorist. He was a man of action. People often think of nonviolent direct action as being passive, but it's actually very active. And what you're doing is confronting the system and saying, you want us to be out of these spaces, but we're going to be here and we're going to occupy them. One of the other things that we often forget is, much like today with Black Lives Matter, one of the key sort of things about Black Lives Matter is how they use social media, which is a new medium. And Dr. King was masterful at using television. And those moments of the water hoses and the police dogs and the protesters being beat weren't moments that just happened. Dr. King went places where he knew that he could provoke the sheriff or provoke the mayor so that he could get these images that would be shown all across the nation on news and all across the world. And so it was a tactical decision. So he's an incredible tactician, a man of immense bravery that sometimes gets forgotten. One of my favorite stories of Dr. King was when he was leading the Montgomery bus boycott. He was 26 years old. He was an outsider. And the reason they asked him to lead it was not because they necessarily thought he was the best leader. It was because they didn't want to suffer the repercussions of the other leaders in the city of leading this effort and what it would cost. So they said, we'll have the young guy lead this. And so his wife is pregnant. He's leading this effort. And he was trying to figure out what to do. I'm finishing my PhD. I got a pregnant wife. They had tried to bomb his house. And he was thinking about giving up and leaving the movement and going back up to Boston, finish his schooling. And he got a threat, a phone call, and he didn't know what to do. And he said he heard a voice from God. He heard the voice of God say to him at midnight in the kitchen, Martin, stand for justice, stand for truth. And from that moment forward, he continued to fight, even though he received numerous death threats, even when he had so many opportunities to leave the movement and say, I've done enough. He could have went to any university and taught. He could have joined any church and just been a pastor. But despite all of the threats and all of the hardship, he's someone who continued to dedicate his life to social justice, knowing that he was going to be killed. And I think we have to remember that about him.
I can't think of a better way to finish our conversation than with that memory of Dr. King and that admonition to remember his legacy and his work and the full measure of it. Damion Thomas is the curator at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture for sports there, and also a published author and obviously a wonderful speaker. And we thank you so much, Dr. Thomas, for spending a bit of your time with us today.
It is a pleasure, and thank you so much.
We're joined by the Apollo's Director of Community Programs, Ade Williams.
The forefathers of hip hop, the last poets, first united over at Marcus Garvey Park, just a few blocks away from the Apollo Theater, and were performing on our stage not much later. That may have been the beginning of the Apollo's connection to message-oriented hip hop. But no matter how it started, that connection runs as deep as the pantheon of artists from that subgenre who have blessed mics on our stage, ranging from Public Enemy, Common, Queen Latifah, Immortal Technique, Talib Kweli, Mumu Fresh, and I could go on and on and on. We celebrate our new season by continuing in that tradition. And speaking of tradition, we are presenting you with an artist whose father and whose grandfather both performed on the Apollo Theater stage. When reviewing the song you're about to hear, WNYC Soundcheck wrote, Jay Swiss weaves a dizzying web of references and allusions to great African Americans in many fields as a way of demanding equal recognition for Black culture. We are closing out Apollo Uptown Hall, MLK, Activism, and the Arts by presenting the skills of Jay Swiss.
No back door, I'm trying to get it from the front. Respect for my people, we should have had it from the jump. Loving the culture, we always give you what you want. Honor the history, we ain't waiting for a month. No back door, I'm trying to get it from the front. Respect for my people, we should have had it from the jump. Loving the culture, we always give you what you want. Honor the history, we ain't waiting for a month. Temperature rising, think it's about time. Name an element, melanin couldn't outshine. We see the video for the body is outlined. The trauma is real, no time to appeal. Couldn't care less by how you feel. You don't see it, then you never will. When you know you under fire, you could never chill. Would sound like violence, the taking of a building or a body. Murder for vacation, it's like killing is a hobby. I'm just trying to have a normal day. It's exhausting, but I'm proud of my people and I feel it so often. Caught between ropes, I ain't talking about boxing, but we fighting like a bunch of Jack Johnsons. Ali in his prime with the rhymes, I'm too pretty. Little Tupac in his prime, don't push me. Latifah, Jamie Foxx, do a little of everything. Welcome to the cookout and we playing Frankie Beverly. I'm about my biz like it's Greenwood Tulsa in 1920. Or Madam C.J. Walker with products across the country. You see the figures no longer hidden, I'm Katherine Johnson. We master rocket science like it's nothing. No back door, I'm trying to get it from the front. Respect for my people, we should have had it from the jump. Loving the culture, we always give you what you want. Honor the history, we ain't waiting for a month. No back door, I'm trying to get it from the front. Respect for my people, we should have had it from the jump. Loving the culture, we always give you what you want. Honor the history, we ain't waiting for a month. Touch hearts like Daniel Hale Williams, with words like Morrison Hurst in my pen working. Fly as Tuskegee, the airman, not the experiment, but know there's always been a healthy fear of this. If Hove handled a rock like Van Exel, I coach the team like McClendon on the fast break. 10 state, repeating before wooden. This time around there be no overlooking, like you better not. Coretta Scott or Betty Shabazz can't get this in class, no, but you gon' get it in rap. It's like Howard U and Spelman mixed with Grambling State. Academics and athletics and forever great. You see the legacy, we all enjoy it on a daily basis, even if we don't truly recognize the depth of greatness. Since day one and it's infinite, from style to culture to product, we infinite. Nothing move without us, control traffic like Garrett Morgan. If Earth was a person and black folk is a vital organ, that means you play us, then you play yourself. Think about it, check the history, you ever start to doubt it, let us breathe. From the front, respect for my people, we should have had it from the jump. Loving the culture, we always give you what you want. Honor the history, we ain't waiting for a month. No back door, I'm trying to get it from the front. Respect for my people, we should have had it from the jump. Loving the culture, we always give you what you want. Honor the history, we ain't waiting for a month.
Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. This is the year of Jubilee. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. When my Lord set his people free. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. I prayed all night, I prayed all day. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Till my Lord, he showed me the way. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Thank God Almighty, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last.
Oh, freedom,
freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. 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 Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming, oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes, I know.
Center of Culture, Creativity, Art, and Activism is the soul of American culture. The world-famous Apollo has been a beacon of Black cultural expression for 88 years. More than just a theater, its famous stages are central to our history, having presented the most preeminent artists and thinkers of our time. As a presenter and a commissioner, the Apollo is one of the most iconic nonprofit performing arts centers in the world. The past, present, and future of Black excellence is the Apollo, and your support will make you part of its enduring legacy. Become a member or make a donation today. At the center of culture, creativity, art, and activism is the soul of American culture. The world-famous Apollo has been a beacon of Black cultural expression for 88 years. More than just a theater, its famous stages are central to our history, having presented the most preeminent artists and thinkers of our time. As a presenter and a commissioner, the Apollo is one of the most iconic nonprofit performing arts centers in the world. The past, present, and future of Black excellence is the Apollo, and your support will make you part of its enduring legacy. Become a member or make a donation today.
Welcome to Apollo. All you need is a dream that's worth to follow. Let's do it today, don't wait for tomorrow. At the Apollo, make it a reality. It's your chance, it's your time to see your name in lights. Welcome to Apollo. All you need is a dream that's worth to follow. Let's do it today, don't wait for tomorrow. At the Apollo, make it a reality. It's your chance, it's your time to see your name in lights. We out.
Tune.